President Trump is renewing threats against
The Iranians know it, threatening to attack all ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
They can turn it into a hellscape.
and vowing to blow up every bridge and power plant if the country won't make the deal that the U.S. is offering.
So, have you ever noticed that every time there's a war in, let's say, the Middle East, the Americas, or even in Asia, there's always gonna be a conversation about oil prices? You might be wondering, why the hell would a conflict in the Middle East, far off, maybe 7,000 kilometers away, affect and dictate our daily lives here in Indonesia? My name is Karan, and this is my podcast, Uncensored. This war that's happening in the Middle East is affecting several things like transportation costs, like oil prices, and even food. And even in your own kitchen, you can notice that cooking oil has been harder to find because why? They're selling it for higher prices. Energy Minister Bahlil said that, quote unquote, for almost 2 months during the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, we remain stable. Stable. We're here to find out if that's actually true. So ultimately, what we'll learn today are 3 main things. So that is what actually happened in the Middle East and how is there a conflict, and 2, why us Indonesians should care and how we're getting affected, and most importantly is 3, are we actually prepared according to Mas Balil Ganteng, or are we setting ourselves up for a disaster? So what really happened and what really set up the conflict in the Middle East? Now, I'll put it into simple words first. So as the tension between Iran and Israel escalated, Iran eventually threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, which threw the global economy into panic. Literally, a majority of nations that are constantly importing oil from Middle Eastern countries are panicking right now because their main supply of oil is gone. And that affects their citizens as well. So what actually is the Strait of Hormuz? Now, the Strait of Hormuz is a maritime choke point that sits between the UAE and Iran. I think of it as a giant toll road for oil tankers to pass through. If this toll road is supposedly closed down, then of course there's no efficient way for these oil tankers to pass through and transport their goods. This will immediately have a large and massive impact on every single nation that imports oil from the Middle East, as insurance prices will go up as these ships won't be able to pass through. Now, how this affects Asia significantly is because 80% of the oil that comes into Asia passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and that means South Korea, Japan, China, even Indonesia will feel the effects of this strait closing down. Now, the weird part is that countries that have no direct role or aren't directly involved with this conflict are facing the massive, immense consequences in compared to the countries who are already playing a somewhat direct role or somewhat involved in this conflict in the Middle East, as seen in the rise in oil prices in many Southeast Asian countries. While the United States, which has a very direct and very involved role in that conflict in general, is doing completely fine. Their economy is not collapsing like other Southeast Asian states. And that is because Asian states are mostly oil importers. But the question is, why do prices rise so fast? Now, the common misunderstanding that people get is that prices react to shortages, but in reality, they don't. They react quickly due to fear. Now, an analogy that I use sometimes to explain this to someone is by using the concert analogy. Let's say you're going to some sort of concert, maybe Leve, maybe Daniel Caesar, and there is a shortage in concert tickets. Now, as people acknowledge that the demand for tickets rise, they start to up the prices. Now, this correlates directly to the oil crisis that is perpetrated by the conflict in the Middle East. And this is where Indonesia's problems begin. So the question now, therefore, is Indonesia really an oil-producing country? Some people say yes, but I think that we're probably not. Why? It's because we aren't producing enough oil at a fast rate. We are currently at an oil production deficit. Now, to be specific, we are producing 580,000 barrels of oil per day, while we are consuming 1.6 million per day. that means we have to import more oil from external sources. Now, if that strait is closed, where are we going to import our oil from? And that means we are going to have a prolonged oil supply deficit. And to further support this, I'm going to present you with a quick history lesson. So, as we all know, Indonesia, before 2009, we were part of OPEC. But then, after 2009, we left because we couldn't meet our own oil production demands. Imagine someone ordered 100 loaves of bread, and then you only have the resources to bake 60. That means you have to import 40 loaves of bread to meet the 100 loaf bread demand. And that is exactly what the situation, what the oil production deficit looks like in Indonesia. And another surprising fact is that around 60% of Indonesia's oils are from imports. Now, imports from where? You might think the Middle East, but let's look no further, Singapore, which is funny because Singapore doesn't even produce that much oil. And therefore, we are just paying for oil that Singapore imports from who knows where, and therefore we are paying a middleman. Singapore is a middleman. Now, let's go back to our first point. Remember when I was talking about how our energy minister, Balil, was saying that we are completely stable, we're fine. Well, let's look at the International Energy Agency and what they said about the amount of emergency energy supply we should have. So they said 90 days of emergency reserves is recommended for countries to keep around. But if we look at domestic data, we have 3 weeks, only 3 whole weeks of emergency energy reserves. Now, I don't know the math, but that is really little compared to the 90 days that have been recommended. So why are these prices rising and surging so fast, but they seem to never come down? Or maybe they do, but it's really slow. So the Strait of Hormuz being closed, it causes these oil prices to surge. And when, let's say the strait reopens, it doesn't immediately come down because these shipping routes need time to recover, and companies are still staying really cautious because we really can't predict how these political global issues, global conflicts are going to escalate or de-escalate. Maybe to put it into, let's say, a local scale, if we look at food examples, our farmers in Indonesia are being affected by this crisis every single day because they need fertilizer, they need oil, they need fuel. So yes, this conflict does affect your ability to cook nasi goreng or even eat nasi goreng in the future. Earlier this year, but I guess President Prabowo did a trade agreement with this guy, President Trump. But basically the trade agreement involved us, Indonesia, buying large-scale energy imports from the United States, and we were required to open up our markets or face heavy tariffs from the United States. But the main controversy was whether this trade agreement was reciprocal in its nature. Supporters say that this trade agreement allowed us to diversify our sources and ultimately it strengthened our ties with the United States, or more specifically Trump. But I say that it just increased our oil dependency because we are opening up our markets freely to the United States while we are forced to buy large-scale imports from the United States. Therefore, we are not diversifying our sources, but we are rather buying largely from one independent source bilaterally, which is the United States. So the big overarching question that I want you guys to think about was, how prepared were we actually for this global economic shock? And I think that maybe we're not too prepared, but what real energy security looks like is that we have diversified sources, we have long-term planning, and we have, again, larger reserves because 3 weeks is nothing close to 90 days. So as we end off this episode, I would like to end off with 3 main takeaways that I think we've established during our discussion here. So that's 1, this conflict, any type of conflict doesn't have to happen in Southeast Asia or even Indonesia to affect us local civilians in Indonesia significantly. On to my 2nd, the global crisis of oil does not just affect fuel, but it affects us, our daily lives, in ways we don't think about. 3rd, I think that our preparation matters more than how fast we react, because long-term planning is very essential to handle crises like this. I think it's also evident in successful nations. The reason they have survived this crisis is because they planned it a year ago or even further back. So my final question to you guys, if this conflict in the Middle East can influence and dictate the way we live our lives in Indonesia, from oil to food and transportation, how connected do you think our world really is? If you want to keep watching my future and upcoming episodes, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell for more updates about my future discussions.